Okay. Ah.
One, two.
Thank you very much, Francis. So, guys, thank you very much for turning up today in this esteemed building at this definitely esteemed festival, which I've spent years trying to get into, but in Jaipur, to get a DJ set in to the point where I even made friends with William Dalrymple, ended up at his house, had dinner with him, went out for a drink with him, but I never made the festival. And I have now, thanks to Nutkhut and Ajay Chabra and Simi as well. We really, really appreciate that, guys. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting us and calling this South Asian Renaissance, which no doubt will be diving into what is a Renaissance. Is this a Renaissance from an earlier time? Is that kind of seen through the lens of the diaspora, or is it seen through the lens of what's happening to South Asian politics back in the motherlands and the fatherlands? But we'll jump into that. You heard these introductions. Did you guys hear your own introductions? Yeah. Are you happy, Dhruva Balram? And Reeta, are you happy?
100%, yeah.
Okay. I think the way we're going to do it is we're going to do a deep dive with Reeta, another deep dive with Dhruva. Both of you I feel, properly emblematic of what's happening in the diaspora in the 21st century, and the work that you're doing so important. So I'm going to do that whole thing of unscrewing the top of your head, getting right into your brain, and then you guys will have a chance to ask questions afterwards as well. And it's the JLF, it's the British Library. If you don't ask questions, naughty. We expect a lot of questions. So Reeta, feel free to illustrate some of your answers also with the work that you've done, with personal anecdotes, your personal life, if you want to go down there. And you're both here because of the work you do within the diaspora and also the work that you're doing globally as well. So just bear that in mind when you're answering. It's lovely to hear about times spent up at mothers and fathers' feet, or growing up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or for some of Generation Z, even the noughties. But I also want to make sure both of you still try and kind of take that thread back to what's happening within the South Asian, not just literary community, but the creative communities in the diaspora and also in the motherlands as well. So I think the best way to start off with you, Reeta, is just to find out where we are in 2023. And I want you to take us on a journey from your either earliest memories or maybe your first activism. And I just want to get a sense of what it is to be you in 2023 with the multiple identities that obviously live inside of you.
Starting with the small questions, I see, as usual, Bobby. Thank you. Firstly, just to say it's really great to be here, and thank you all for joining us. I feel like, so I'll just tell you a little bit about what I do. I'm an artist. I call myself a storyteller. I'm a multi-format creative, so I started out as a poet and spoken word artist, and then I was a singer in jazz bands and in various bands. And then I learned to produce my own music because there were loads of weird sounds in my head that nobody understood, that were producers in the UK at the time. So I decided to learn how to do it myself. And then I DJ'd for a bit, and then now I have a show that I've been touring for the last, I started touring it last year, did a 6-month run. It's called The Remedy, and it sort of brings together all of that, as well as a lot of comedy, because, well, if you come to the show, you'll know why you need the comedy in there, because it's kind of deep, right? So, yeah, I'm a multi-format creative, but I also am known for my work as an activist. I run an organisation called Gaysians, which I founded 6 years ago now, just over 6 years. We are a movement for the voices of South Asian LGBTQ plus people in the UK primarily, but we're increasingly international. So we represent and support over 30 organisations that are predominantly charities and support groups that work for the well-being of our communities, from housing to mental health support to sexual health support, etc. So that's sort of been a really cool part of my work. So to me, it's all kind of the same stuff. But yeah, there's a sort of sense of activism across all of my art and all of my work as well as a writer and performer. To answer your question, like, where are we at in 2023? I think, what do you mean by we, firstly?
We, the South Asian diaspora, first of all, and then also your personal experience of that, because each individual within the diaspora has their own experience.
I would say that for me, I feel like this is a really exciting time to be British South Asian, because there's a lot of community and a lot of movement in terms of spaces and getting together and being able to share our art and share our work and share our voices in a way that we didn't have platforms for not very long ago. So when I was growing up, that certainly wasn't the case. I didn't see versions of me, and goodness gracious me was like, oh my goodness, there we are, and we still refer to that as a really, really key point in terms of our British South Asian culture. But it's true, because we have been sort of really silenced, I think, for a really long time. And I remember listening to you on the radio and just sort of being a big fan of your work as well, and being a really important voice for us too. So I think the British South Asian identity is really complex, and we haven't learned about how we came to be here at school and in our education system. So I think what we're doing at the moment that is really exciting for me is that we're starting to explore some of how we came to be here, what is our journey, what is our generational experience of being here, at the same time as we are exploring our well-being and our mental health. So I think there's a sort of a convergence of our identities in terms of art and in terms of mental health and well-being that I think are coming together really beautifully and really powerfully. And there are so many platforms and spaces for us to explore that now that just didn't even exist 5 years ago. And I know, sort of growing up, and I remember when I sort of started to come out to myself in my late teens and then to my family later, I didn't know any other queer South Asians. And so that sort of isolation was really tough. But now I can say that there are so many amazing spaces that we can congregate as South Asians of every type of identity and background. And I'm noticing that massively at the moment. So that's why I say it's a really exciting time. So 2023, I think, is a great time to be here.
And we're definitely going to pick up on this later on, just because some of us of a certain age remember a time in the late 90s when the same words were used. It's an exciting time, things are changing, we've arrived, this is who we are, and it kind of fizzled away. So we'll come back, and this is for both of you, we'll come back and try and work out if what's happening right now, I'm not saying it's not real, but if it's something that, does it have roots? Will it stand? Or is it, as you say, just a flash in the pan? But we'll come back to that. What about how Britain's shaped you, Reeta? Because obviously, once again, we're all different, we're different generations as well. For me, my experience was massively shaped by the National Front in the 70s. The generational divide between ourselves as a generation and our parents, who literally down to the last man and woman were immigrants. Whereas, I talk to so many people now and they go, my mum really likes you, she was at uni with you, and I'm like, oh dude, you're 2 or 3 generations in. So how's your British experience been growing up?
I think I've always felt sort of othered, I guess. I was born in Southall in the late 70s. I'm 45 yesterday.
Woo!
And thank you. Just fishing a little bit there, obviously. So I was born in Southall, and then when I was 6, my family moved to a place that I thought was called Benchester, but it's actually called Winchester. We, yeah, I know, I got bullied a bit about that. But so I spent my school years in a place where so I went from a place that was entirely Asian, right? And everyone in my primary school was Asian. We had 2 white kids in the whole school. Everyone else was Asian. Everyone spoke some form of Asian language. Punjabi was my first language, and I had lots of family around me, and extended family. And then I went from that environment that I really loved to this other environment that was completely opposite, because in Winchester, we were the first Indian family to move there in the early 80s. And I remember starting primary school, and they had to sort of really work quite hard to be able to prepare for a kid that was different, and wasn't at the same level in terms of English and stuff like that. And I remember feeling really embraced by the kids when I was at that school. And I think the sort of racism that existed in that place, in a place like Winchester, which at the time was the richest city in England, it's very historical, it's very wealthy. And I won't make jokes about Rishi going to school there or anything at the moment, but we'll stay away from that. But it was that kind of place, right? It was a massive culture shock, right, for me and for my family. We didn't have extended family around us, or anywhere, places of worship or anything like that. We didn't have any community. So our home became this like really Indian sort of place, right?
An outpost.
Total outpost, yeah, that was it, like a little flag, like here we are. And then, everything outside was like just assimilating. So you'd leave home and you'd sort of become a different person because you had to fit in. And I think that kind of assimilating is like so common because we all do it actually for our survival. And, we call it code switching now. But actually, over a period of time, I think it can be really harmful to our mental health because actually how we're showing up as ourselves or our authentic selves when our survival depends on us being something else, being one person at home, one person at school, one person with these friends, a different person with cousins, etc. And that kind of continues. That's kind of why I say that Asians are really good at navigating white spaces, actually, because we are so used to having to adapt and having to do that. And I think that our history of colonization allows us to do that as well. But for me, I wasn't thinking about these big things when I was a kid. I was just aware that I was different. I was aware that there was some people, some kids and some adults had an issue with us. I was aware that it was racism, but we didn't really talk about it. I think Asian families don't tend to talk about racism very much. I think that other cultures will, some of my friends who are black have grown up being told that they need to be aware of their safety and they need to be aware of certain things because you have to in order to survive the system here. With Asians, we never had that chat, right? We never had that chat, and so we sort of are dealing with this different type of racism. It's like a different type of awareness that you sort of don't talk about. You don't talk about it with your parents, you don't talk about it with each other. You don't learn about it in school, right? So you sort of go, for me, I don't think I've really had any conversations about racism until I was probably in my 20s, of any real depth. Probably even longer than that. So what's amazing right now is that there's so much depth and nuance around these sorts of conversations. But that wasn't happening then. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I'd say that there's been a massive shift in terms of racism and conversations around it and where we are with that. But back then there wasn't.
Seeing as we're all on stage and we've got microphones, I'm 52 years old. I went through some of the worst racism. I still haven't talked to my mum and dad about it. And, I come from a slightly, actually pretty liberal house, but I just know if I ever have that conversation with them, for me to bring all of that pain up, I think it's just going to hurt them at the very old age they're at now. So it's interesting, even now in 2023, this 52-year-old who's great with his gob and can speak on stage with mics cannot sit his mum and dad down and go, can we just have a chat about what I endured every day? Because I'm assuming they saw the bruises and everything, but nothing ever got mentioned.
Nothing gets talked about. I mean, we had a shop, and really trying not to make shop jokes now, but there was a point where my dad was held at knife point when by racist thugs, and he's like, I know about it through my mum, but like he's never talked about it. And I know that when we lived in Southall, he was a bus driver. Honestly, so many stereotypes here, I love it. He was a bus driver, and so was Sadiq's dad, so I think that's cool, okay? And actually, I loved having a dad that was a bus driver and having a shop, while we're on the subject. But yeah, he was a bus driver, and on a Friday night when he was driving, he would actually turn the lights off at the last stop, which was outside a pub, because the racist attacks he would experience were so severe. And this is going back to like Southall riots kind of era, So like you're saying, there was a time, there was a moment where we were retaliating, we were fighting back, and we were talking about things. There was an Asian underground movement, and day parties and stuff. But it's almost like everything kind of just sort of, we stopped doing something or something. Yeah. I don't know, what happened?
Well, we could discuss that. Maybe some of you guys can frame your questions around that. I think it's very interesting that 9/11 happened literally at the height of me DJing across the globe, and then not really getting any gigs after that, unless it was in India. But that's another question possibly for you guys at the end. Very quickly, because we're halfway through your half an hour, and I know you're not going to be a spokesperson for every issue, every person, every individual who's brown, South Asian and LGBTQ, but just give us a bit of what you've seen of that. I remember buying, I think it was the Gay Times, and seeing an advert in the back for a gay party, and someone called Shiv was running it. And then I heard about DJ Reeta a couple of years later. If you can take us on a journey from those early days, and what you remember first to where we are now as well.
Yeah, so I think Club Kali is our longest running queer South Asian club night. It's been going for, I think, about 25 years now, or definitely somewhere between 20 and 25 years. And there's actually a documentary that's being made about it at the moment, which is really amazing. But yeah, Club Kali's kind of been the space that was around for a long time. I actually never went because I didn't know any other queer South Asians. I was kind of too scared to go on my own. For a long time, But it's still going, and it's such an important part of our movement, because even just knowing that existed was really important, But yeah, I'd say that, look, to give you an example, like when I came out to my family, I was like 27, 28. They didn't accept it, and basically I had no contact with them after that. And for 15 years, and then we started having contact last year. So for 15 years, I had no family, basically, and had no access to my South Asian culture. And, if you remember, I was growing up in a very, as I mentioned, a very, very sort of incubation tank in terms of like my family and my culture were like one thing. So when I didn't have that, it was really, really tough. And that's why I ended up starting Gaysians, and actually for about 5 or 6 years I was a spokesperson for the South Asian community under pseudonyms and anonymously, because there weren't any Asian queers that were public and out at the time. That sounds bonkers now because we are everywhere, and I am really proud of that. But there was a time not very long ago when it was really, really hard to find other queer South Asian people. And even, places like Club Kali were like, lots of people were closeted, lots of people were in marriages of convenience. That's still the case today, It's not safe for us to come out because of things that happen, like what happened to me. And what happened to me isn't even the worst thing that happened, So that's the reality that a lot of us are still living with even here, which I think people don't realize. But, I would look around and I'd think, well, how am I the only queer South Asian person that is, assigned female at birth? Why can't I see any other lesbians who are Asian? If I went into queer spaces, there were no Asians there, ever. This is for like 2 decades. And if I went into Asian spaces, there was nobody that was like visibly queer or out, So again, you're sort of compartmentalizing your identity. I can be queer here, but I can't be Asian. I can be Asian here, but I can't be queer. Like, that is not healthy for us, is it? So that was my reality, and that's the reality for loads and loads and loads of us. And I got to a point where, because I didn't have my family, it actually became a real privilege for me, because I was able to speak out and start using my name and face publicly, which is something that I consider now a real gift. I was able to fulfill something for my community and actually get a lot in terms of being able to share my story, which has been really healing for me. And I'm back in touch with my family, and it's chaos, I'm not going to lie, but I reconnected with them last year, so there's like a really beautiful, part of that story. But 15 years is a really long time to not have family. Like I said, sort of compartmentalizing, not having anywhere you can even go where you can fully show up as yourself. So to me, being able to support spaces and opportunities for people to be able to do that is really my work. But Club Collie has been doing amazing work, and then there are other charities and support groups that I started meeting, because I think social media is what really changed it for us. Because social media is how I was able to start to find people that were speaking out, often anonymously like me initially, but we were able to find each other, and then we were able to gradually sort of come out publicly, bit by bit. And so Gaysians.org is the website I set up to start listing these organizations, because when I spoke to them all, I said, why can't I find you online? Or I met someone on Twitter who told me to come to your meeting, come to your meetup, and they'd all say the same thing, we don't have any funding and we don't know how to market ourselves. And so Gaysians.org has been a space for us to find each other, essentially. But again, it's just one of many different movements that have started that have been really exciting to watch and see, and a lot of Drew's work as well. So, I think it's been a combined effort that's gained momentum over time, that's been really fueled by social media and a real desire to change things. And I know that one of the things that you said to me before is like, why is it so queer? Why is this South Asian sort of renaissance so queer, And I would say that that's because, like, queerness is inherently creative. If you are living outside of what is the norm, you think differently, that's inherently a creative act. So many of us are artists, so many of us are leaning into our otherness, actually, instead of trying to assimilate. So I'd say that, and I'd say that also, our rights are being taken away by this government all the time. India only removed criminal legislation in 2018, and we still have like about 50 countries in the world that criminalize homosexuality. So the fact is, like, South Asians are not under the same threat as we are as LGBTQ plus South Asians. It's not safe for us to walk out on the street. For me, since the Brexit referendum, things have been palpably different in this country, both in terms of race and gender expression and sexuality. And I think that has also fueled a lot of us to try and do something to make a change.
I just quickly want to take a bit of what you said and just kind of go on a slight diversion and then come back. Everywhere I go through my work, I get to mix with South Asian creatives, but I also spend so much of my time with the forgotten South Asians, the working class South Asians, people who aren't creative, people who are looked down not by government, not just because of their race, but actually because of their class and their earning power. And I have seen during this renaissance, if that's what we want to call it, during this coming together of different minds and this exciting creative time, also a growth in right-wing religious stuff going on amongst all South Asian religions, if you can call them that. I'm talking about Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, and how that stuff has now trickled down to working class South Asians in this country. So in terms of intersection and in terms of great sunny uplands, how are you going to navigate that? Or how is your community going to navigate that? Or am I basically being a bit tabloid about it?
No, I think you make a really, really good point. You know, we're in a really divisive time. We're essentially in a two-party system in a really divisive time in terms of, you know, politics, socioeconomics, etc. You know, social media, as much as I big it up, is not a good place to have nuanced conversations, is it? It's very divisive. And I think the pandemic has kind of amplified the echo chambers that we're in, because what are the spaces we now have to converge and be together with people that are different to us, right? There aren't any. You know, we don't have community centres, or, you know, they're closing, libraries are closing, youth centres are closing. Like, we don't have spaces. You know, I've always said, like, the shop is the only place where we really converge with people that are different, you know, and you say hi and you get on, and you know, we need to be able to find a point of connection, because I genuinely believe that all human beings have something in common that's beautiful with every other human being. It can be, and that's the starting point to connect on the things that are different. But if we're not given the opportunity to even start to have conversations with people that are different to us, it's like, this is where we're going to end up, you know, and that's how they want it. And I think it's really sad to see that happening here, to see that happening in India, and see that happening in so many parts of the world. You know, we've seen so many right-wing governments take power in recent years, and we know that once they're in, it's really hard to get rid of them. So I think that, you know, while I'm hopeful, I also feel like, you know, energetically things are very divisive, but that just motivates me, and I think a lot of us more, to try and change things and work harder at what we're doing.
To just come back to your answer, which was brilliant in terms of the systems that are perpetuating these kinds of things. I suppose what I'm talking about is that day-to-day experience with the rest of the community, when parts of our community are getting more religiously right-wing, maybe not even religiously, just more right-wing, and how that manifests itself through all the religions on this planet. And for me, I worry about how we move together as a diaspora, when actually we get to sit at JLF. Through my work, I get to see just how many people there are out there who are South Asian, who are excited about Diljit playing Coachella, who are massively homophobic. Can I just throw that back at you?
Look, I don't know what the answer is, you know, because it's horrifying that this is happening, you know, and even like for me personally, you know, I'm recently reconciled with family, and I joke that it's chaos, because it's really hard, you know. My family's like very, you know, right-wing in a lot of ways, right? And so I'm having to deal with actual homophobia and transphobia and racism and all kinds of misogyny on a day-to-day basis in the conversations that we're having. And I'm having to think about how I'm going to deal with that. And, you know, I'm just another human being that's trying to navigate that. So I don't have the answers. I don't know. I feel like sometimes it does feel hopeless. It does, you know. But at other times, there are connecting moments, and I just believe that those connecting moments are more powerful, you know. So I try and focus on those and just do what I can, you know. And I think that's all I can say. I don't know what else to say to that.
Oh, look, I don't have an answer. My answer is actually the same as yours, which is every time I read a disgusting or a problematic exchange on social media, I just sit there and think, well, if those two people met in real life in a shop, even if a discussion started about beliefs and values, they'd probably just respect each other and go, all right, see you later. So, yeah, sometimes we need to remove ourselves from the hate cauldron that social media has become.
I'd also say quickly, I think this is where allyship's really important, because I think it's easier for me to, like a lot of the work that I was, you know, doing over the pandemic was around anti-blackness in our own community, which it's easier for me to talk about that because I'm not directly affected by it in the same way as my black friends are. But, you know, it's harder for me to have conversations with my family or people close to me about certain things that are very personal to me, because that's triggering for me. It's re-traumatizing myself, and I might choose not to have that conversation or just let that slide in that moment, because I don't want to have to show up for myself in that moment because I can't do it. that's where we need allies, and that's where actually showing up for each other is really important in those moments. So when we're hearing stuff that we don't agree with in our homes and around those dinner tables, it's actually just saying, hey, you know, like, maybe there's a different way to look at this, or actually I've got a friend that's whatever, you know. It's that kind of stuff. I think allyship is actually a really crucial part of how we move forward, because we're being forced into, you know, individualism or, you know, sort of tribalism, and we're not necessarily converging and supporting each other in the way that maybe we can, you know.
All right, Reeta, my last question just for this section is, having met you a couple of times and having looked at your work, it's impossible to pin down what you do, which is, I love it, because I remember my dad saying to me when I was about 20, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm kind of DJing, but I want to do a bit of radio. Oh, I've formed a band. He was going, jack of all trades, master of none. I mean, typical Asian dad response. But I love it within you. And what I find interesting is you are such an activist. You've got the brain of a politician and an activist. You show empathy. I would have totally been fine with you setting up Gaysians and then building that until it was global. The fact that you're doing TED Talks, the fact that you're doing comedy, I played you on my show because you're also a musician and a spoken word poet, and you know, basically it's impossible to define you. You're blurred all around the edges. Why did you end up becoming that kind of artist and not just one or the other?
I think it's partly just the journey and circumstances. Like, they weren't signing like Asian women 25 years ago, let alone queer ones, right? Like, who can we name? MIA, is that it? I mean, I rate MIA, but still, like, is that still the only mainstream South Asian artist in this part of the world that we're talking about, you know? There are loads of amazing artists now that are coming up, and that's great. But for me, because when I started out as a musician, which is like, music's always been my first love, it was, you know, having a career as an artist was not something, it was like lawyer, doctor, accountant. It wasn't, you know, that wasn't viable to think about a career in the arts, and they weren't the role models and stuff like that. So for me, I was sort of trying on hats in real time. I wasn't studying music. I was going by ear, and I was going to places that I liked, and I was learning from people, and that's kind of how I am. I'm more experiential. I'm just that kind of artist. There's not one way or formula of how you make your work or anything like that, or what your journey is. So I love getting older because I'm always exploring new ways, and I feel like so much more enriched every time I explore something new. I love learning, basically. But I think the circumstantial part of it is, yeah, I was in bands and they weren't, you know, they weren't signing us, and then the bottom fell out of the music industry, you know, with sort of Napster and all of that time, right? And we were big on MySpace. And basically, you know, people weren't buying music, so they weren't signing anyone. They were signing like, you know, like white guys that played guitars because they knew that would sell. So they weren't taking, the music industry was not taking a risk for a long time, you know that, right? So it's like, they weren't gonna sign artists like me. So I then just went on to do different things, you know? And it's always been like, I'm just doing a different thing. And so for me, it's like, I get so much satisfaction out of all the things I do because I'm learning and I'm sharing and I'm growing and I'm connecting with people. But that's my idea of success. Yeah, when I was a kid, of course I wanted to be on Top of the Pops, you know what I mean? But it didn't work out. And there's no Top of the Pops now. But for me, I'm satiated in other ways. And I think that's part of just maturing and growing as a person as well. Success to me means something quite different now to what it did then. To me, it's about constantly growing and learning and sharing what I'm doing. So that might explain why I do so many different things. But I did go on TikTok, and I do think I've got ADHD as well. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, a lot of us getting diagnosed in our 40s and 50s, myself included. Yeah. Not diagnosed yet, though.
Assessed, yeah. Second assessment, yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the mix. Okay, so I just want to move to Dhruva right now, brother. I want to ask you what I asked Reeta right at the beginning, and I know that you have your music journalist head and your love of politics, and I know they often combine, but let's leave the music for a moment. Where do you think the diaspora is in 2023? And, you know, as someone who spent time in Canada, where if you ask me, some of the most exciting diaspora activities are happening at the moment. Where do you think the diaspora is right here, right now?
That's a good question. I feel like it's in a better place than it ever was, but it's still trying to figure out how to create the structures necessary so that we don't have to keep having these conversations. Because I think over time, like you said, actually, you said it really well, like the late 90s had a movement and it was incredible. You were a vital part of that. And Reeta was a vital part of that. Club Kali was huge in, you know, the British South Asian scene, specifically in the UK. So that was really a moment. 9/11 happens. Things are still happening, but it's low-hanging fruit. But the white gaze didn't care about us until a few years ago. But people have been doing things for time. Like, it's just only a few of us were allowed to actually get to the forefront of any of our industries. But like, I went to go see Across the Spider-Verse last night. If anyone's not seen it, incredible. And there's an entire scene like where they've created a universe of Mumbai, and there's an Indian Spider-Man. Nikesh Shukla's publishing the first ever Indian Spider-Man. Like, this wouldn't have existed 5, 6, 10 years ago. So in a way, it's incredible, because I think capitalism has realized that there are 1 billion people in India, and there's more than 1 billion people within the South Asian diaspora and South Asia that they can use and utilize and benefit from. But the diaspora, I think, is trying to create these structures and understand that how do you not get exploited by everything that's happening around you? How do you ensure that you keep your head on while these things are swirling about? And I can see this with my peers who have, you know, skyrocketed to fame over the last few years and have just found that they are at the forefront of their industries, but without actually necessarily having the tools to figure out how to exist now within that space. So I think I just come back to like the idea of having to create structures. At least that's what I see with the peers around me, is that the discussions we are having is, this is all well and good, but how do we make sure that the next generation, the generation after that, don't have these conversations, but just flow?
Well, look, our generation, in terms of people who were there for the Asian Underground, we didn't have these conversations because it was being done for the first time. And when things kind of fizzled out, and that's a debate we can also have later on, did it fizzle out? When it kind of fizzled out, we didn't know what had happened. What I really love about what you guys are doing, specifically within the realms of music and art, in terms of Dialed in terms of the Daytimers movement, is every single time I speak to one of you, there's always a discussion about, we don't want this to go down the pan. We don't want this to fizzle out. So I just think it's very emblematic of what your generation's doing at the moment. You're trying to put down much deeper roots than we ever did. Okay, so that's great. So then tell me, because you know you're a co-creator of Dialed In, a festival which I DJ'd at last year.
It was good, wasn't it?
I cried, right? I cried. I didn't cry. I had a little cry to myself, because it was kind of like, oh, dude, this is exactly what I wanted. We kind of had it back then, but I think the fact that you guys are multidisciplinary and there's a real psychedelic swagger about what you do, I just really connected with it. So, as the co-creator of Dialed In, and I want to take in the bigger stuff that you've also written about, things like Diljit appearing at Coachella, Ali Sethi appearing at Coachella, pulling Raja Kumari on stage. You know, the AP Dylan documentary is about to come out on Amazon. These are all real kind of seminal moments, and they're all really exciting. So with all of that happening, are we approaching some kind of 0 hour, some kind of moment, which many people always contextualize around the Latino moment? I'm not sure if that's the right comparison, but are we fast approaching a moment where maybe a year from now we kind of go, so they headlined the Pyramid Stage at Glastonbury, Coachella's on fire, Rita's amazing, this is all happening, you know, Amazon are doing another AP Dillon documentary. Are we fast approaching a moment like that?
Yes and no. I'm like, my answer is twofold for this. Like, yes, because it's building to something, but no, because we haven't actually figured out that sound yet. That Bollywood and Bhangra is for a subsect of South Asians. It's not for everyone, right? So what is that sound? Like every moment, every culture has that sound. You brought the Latino, Latinx people have an incredible sound that comes out of, they have incredible vision. Look at the music videos, look at the films that are coming out of there. Right now, we're still trying to figure that out. We're having conversations, trying to figure that out. And I would also say no, because I don't think the South Asian love is spread throughout all the regions uniformly. Like Sri Lankans always get left behind in conversations. South Indians, I'm from Tamil Nadu, and all the conversations always get left behind with like my people.
There's an entire Tamil music scene here in London, which exists completely separately from every Bhangra gig out there.
Yeah, which is amazing. Jam spot. There, and then, like, I just, even like with South Asian Heritage Month, no one actually talks about, which I've only just realized, is Black July, which is where like a lot of the Tamils were murdered by Sinhalese people. And there are all these things which I'm still discovering about my South Asian history and about like, you know, Tamil people. And then we spent some time in Nepal last year, and then they often feel really overlooked as like not just within Nepal, but in the diaspora as well. So it's a juggling act, right? Like we are doing so well, but for me, like I'm not looking for perfection. I'm just looking for fair representation across the cultures, which is slowly coming to the fore. We did Boiler Room Pakistan last year, which was incredible. The amount of DJs, like every single DJ that was in Boiler Room Pakistan got gigs in Europe. We're actually bringing Lila. Yeah, we're bringing Lila, whose Boiler Room is right now at 600,000 views, which is so incredible. We're bringing her to Dialed in July. Like, we wanted to make it a full circle moment. We're trying to like just, I don't know, like ensure that there's fair, equitable representation and power within all of these communities and all of these people across South Asia. Because like Bangladesh has an incredible scene. No one's talking about it. There's so much happening in that country.
So look, you've kind of already answered bits of my next question, but that's good because I'm going to build on top of what you've just said. You know, we keep saying the phrase South Asian. We used to say British Asian. It's very, you know, it's great we're saying South Asian now because it makes a lot more sense. But with that in mind, with everything you've said about the fact that you've got currents of power, currents of people saying, I'm repping the South Asian experience when essentially they're repping the Punjabi diaspora experience or the Tamil diaspora or even the Sinhalese diaspora. With all of that in mind, how can we have a Latino moment when actually there's one thing all of us get about being South Asian, and that is not that we're all at each other's throats, but it's such a vast subcontinent. We're such a big people. We'll never be able to do it under the banner South Asian, because you take a kid in a village in Nepal and a kid in a village in...
Let me flip this question back to you and ask you who we're doing this moment for.
Say that again.
Who are we doing this moment for?
This moment, as in the moment...
Yeah.
We're doing it for our South Asian brothers and sisters,
but it's happening already. It's just a collection of moments. It doesn't have to be one big thing. Yeah. It can just be a number of things. Like, we've discussed this before, I think. I can't remember if it's on a panel or off a panel, but Young Singing Boiler Room. Yeah. That was a moment, you know? Diljit going on stage at Coachella, moment. Like, there's so many little moments.
Even the Spider, you know.
It's the Spider-Man thing.
I haven't seen the movie.
Incredible movie.
And my phone was
I can't believe I'm plugging this movie, but it's such a good movie.
The last week, I've just been, dude, Indian Spider-Man.
It's so good. I don't even like Marvel movies or comic books. But yeah, there's all these little moments. I think we just have to, we don't necessarily take what we can get, but it's really heartwarming to see this. Like, I didn't know this going into the movie last night. I didn't know that Diljit would... Jai Paul playing Coachella, for me, that was a huge moment in so many ways. Jai Paul doing the London show was huge in so many ways. Like, there are these little things that are happening that I'm embracing because all of them together are snowballing into us creating roots. And I think that's really important, is that people are finally acknowledging and realizing that there is potential here to actually create roots. Like, and I want them to be as strong as possible, that if there was another atrocity, if there was something to happen, we don't need to like start again, or we don't need to like shift focus away from it, because the power should remain within the community. And if the community can acknowledge and remind themselves that like there is so much importance in these little moments, we'll be fine.
Do you think the power will remain in the community when so much art, even literature, is defined by capitalism? So let's just say this moment happens, or this collection of tiny moments are able to be written about and explained very simply to the capitalists. What's the first thing they're going to do? Is they're going to swoop in and go, this is great. I mean, it could be argued it's happening right now. This is great. We'll own this. And they start selling back this created South Asian identity, not just back to ourselves, but back to the kids. And
you have to ensure that, how do I put this? Okay, so I think one of the best ways to do it is actually ensuring that people learn how to create the power structures themselves, like take the power away from the people who have it. And you can either create it yourself, or you can, okay, I can just give examples here. Like, we did Boiler Room Pakistan, and then the people who were in Pakistan went off and got interest from Keep Hush, which is another streaming service that stream DJ sets. They went and did one in Karachi last year on New Year's Eve. The same individuals are living in Kathmandu at the moment and have gone to go do Keep Hush in Nepal. And I was like, this is amazing. All we did was just give you the introduction. You have gone off and done it yourself. So it's about just giving people the opportunities, and people will run off and do it. Some of them might fail, and that's fine. Like, people fail all the time. It's about getting up and trying it all over again. And you just have to ensure that people themselves, like dialed in, the reason it started is we were genuinely so frustrated with the industry. Like, we've spoken about this as well. Like, Ahad and myself, for example, have been in the music and creative industry for like a decade, and we've been pigeonholed so many times that we're like, what if we do something that isn't pigeonholing us? And that snowballed into a festival that ended up having so many people in it that we realized that there are a lot of people who want this. And then that has gone off and created offshoots. You can see that now, like people who have met at Dialed In, or people who, like artists or people who have met at these events have gone off and started creating their own little small parties, or like making documentaries together, or making music videos, or I don't know, writing books. Like, there are lots of these little things that are happening, and I think that's really encouraging. But you just have to you have to spread the power and make it a flat lay structure, or at least in some way non-hierarchical.
all right, I just quickly want to talk about Haramacy, the book you co-edited, which some people may know about and some people won't. Just tell us a bit about the book and what the genesis for that idea is, and just tell me about the name Haramacy.
So I
look great on a t-shirt, and if you've already got it, I want one, please.
I believe it's on a t-shirt. So I'm a writer and journalist by trade. Have been for like a long time, 12 years, I think. I have, over time, just continuously tried to get these ideas I have into publications, whether it's my love for South Asian artists, trying to platform them, trying to like uplift artists, and there are all these like things that we just can't get into these publications. And I'll give you an example. I pitched a story, Anik Khan actually, I pitched a story about Anik, and he's an incredible story, like would recommend reading it. I pitched around in 2021 to a really big publication, and the editor emailed me back to say that, sorry, we're running another story on a South Asian artist this month. 2 is too many. And those were like, that's just been a constant throughout my career. Like, I've had pushback because we are only allowed in these spaces in limited amounts. And so I was speaking to an individual named Zahid Sultan, who funded the book, and I was speaking to him about these frustrations, and he ended up funding the book. Then Tara Joshi and myself, who is an incredible editor in her own right, she's actually in Oxford right now giving a speech. And the two of us came together and edited a book of essays from people from South Asia, North Africa, and the Middle East. And it was all journalists, writers, and creatives who had found that their work couldn't be anywhere else. Like, they had pitched these ideas to other places, and then it was these essays that spoke to a number of things. We gave them the theme of fracture, and they all spoke to that. It came out last year. It's really good. That's just biased opinion, though. And yeah, that was the book.
Okay, so...
Oh, I have no idea how the name came about. I can't remember for the life of me.
So, sorry, say that.
I can't remember for the life of me how the name came about.
It's such a great name. And as I said, if you can find one of those T-shirts for me, I'll be very happy. Okay, I just want to tackle, before we go to questions, some of the big questions that came out of what you were both talking about. And I think those questions were around, it wasn't just about going to the Asian Underground Club nights. If you went to the Asian Underground Club nights, every other person was a photographer, a writer, a journalist. We were all kind of part of the same generation. We were very unified in the sense that all our parents had only reached the British Isles within 10, 20 years before the Asian Underground had kind of exploded. So when that all happened, and when it disappeared, it was really shocking for us, because it wasn't like, hey, this is a really, for me personally, it was like, hey, this is like our version of the mods, the punks, the rockers, or the hippies. But actually, for most people, it was, this is a proper flourishing in the same way the Summer of Love in the late 60s was, because it wasn't just about music, it was about all art, all creativity. And it did disappear. I think it disappeared personally for manifold reasons. One of them is we didn't put the roots down, which is the work you guys seem to be doing. Then I do think there's an element of 9/11 playing a part alongside many other places. So with that all in mind, this renaissance that we're seeing now, is it a true renaissance? Are you guys picking up on what an earlier generation did and building upon it? Or is this just how shit works?
I think that, I mean, I wasn't around for that, the original movement. I started becoming an artist really publicly, sort of just as that had fizzled out, so I didn't have like that community to tap into. And I'm witnessing what it is to have that now, you know. I'm having my own renaissance as an artist, personally, you know. I think that the things that we have working in our favor are that we have a new generation of artists and activists who are galvanized and in contact with each other in a way that it was much harder for us to be. You know, when I talk about my story, just being able to find other people like me, you know, South Asian artists or South Asian queers, you know, whatever, was really hard. But now it's so much easier. Those spaces exist. So I think that we have a great opportunity, but a lot of the work that I do is around passing that baton. How do we make sure that the legacy continues? You know, I have a lot of young people that work within Gaysians, so that you know, to prepare them to carry this forward, you know. How are we making sure that there's a legacy, and how are we ensuring that things can be passed on to future generations, that the legacy continues, and also, you know, archives in terms of our own stories are really important, because our, you know, queer history is being erased all the time. You know, we've existed for as long as there have been human beings, and because we know that erasure is happening, whether that's, you know, statues and temples in India, or whether that's, you know, articles that have been written that are no longer available online, or whether that's books that are now out of print. You know, we know this erasure is happening of our identities as all oppressed peoples, as all marginalized groups in the world. So how do we keep that alive? And I think that is, we have to do it ourselves. So, you know, when we're looking like institutions and you know, we're talking about Boiler Room. Boiler Room is not owned by somebody from our community. We want to get to a place where we're the ones that are, you know, Gay Times is not, you know, owned by us, you know. We have to create our own systems, and we have to ensure the legacy of those systems. We have to ensure archives of all this stuff we're talking about, and we have to own it ourselves. And it can't just be on social media platforms, because we don't own those, and they can just decide to remove stuff anytime. So how do we maintain those legacies? How do we ensure that we are creating systems that we own and that we run and that we can grow? And that means us owning capitalism in the sense of how we're going to do that whilst maintaining our authenticity, you know. For me, it's a real circular moment being in the British Library, because the first time I shared my story with anyone was 10 years ago with a theatre company that wanted to collect stories from 10 queer South Asian people in the UK who had, because basically there was a real problem with invisibility, and they wanted to create a theatre show and tour it around the UK to Asian areas to open up the topics that were coming up for us. And that recording is actually kept in the British Library, which is, so for me, it's really magical to be here and sort of be here and kind of reflect on that 10-year period when so much has happened for me personally and for our communities. So I'm hopeful, but I do think that we've got to be really smart about how we're doing it.
Dhruv?
I completely back that 100%. Like, we need to create our own structures and legacies. It's something we talk about all the time at Dialed In. Like, can't depend on anybody else because they can remove it at any point. But I also want to state that, like, nothing disappears. Like, things just come in waves. If you look at, I'll just talk about music, for example. Jazz made its way to India in the late 1800s under minstrelsy, and then came into clubs and venues in the 1930s and 40s in Mumbai specifically. And then from there you have like things resting arguably for like 20 years before like Indo-jazz becomes huge, and then like Ravi Shankar is like a global name. And then things kind of rest again globally before the 90s really came about and put things on the map, and then you have scenes in London, Birmingham, New York really become huge. And then things rested again on a global diaspora way until now. But during the rest, things are still moving. India was booming as a market in the last 20 years, as you know. Like, so much has been happening. Like, Manar has been doing so much. Reeta has been doing so much. Like, things have just been happening. And I think the wave, we just have to try and ride this wave for as long as possible and ensure that the next wave is bigger and the one after that's bigger than the previous one. And I think it's happening slowly over time. We just have to learn how to, ride and control the wave each time.
All right, last question before we open to the questions and answers. Q&A, that's what they call it. And that is, it's just about the word Renaissance. We've talked about the here and now and a possible Renaissance because we're all literally physically part of, you know, some of us, both of these flourishings. Just on a wider level, and this is actually even wider than the diaspora, this is taking in maybe centuries of, you know, the stuff that we all talk about in our houses. The Indian subcontinent was the richest country in the world, and the British came along, and then all the money left, and they took trillions out. All true, by the way. Is there a bigger Renaissance happening? Let's not talk about the diaspora. Is the 21st century a space where the South Asian countries, the subcontinent, are going to have a Renaissance now that they have thrown off the shackles of colonialism? You know, maybe it's taken 60, 70, 80 plus years for those countries to even just kind of deal with that, throwing off the shackles. Is there another Renaissance?
Yes and no, because like if India was to be a major global player in any ways, who is it on the back of? And like you brought up earlier, like right-wing Hinduism is a really terrifying thing. And like as someone who's a journalist, it's quite scary going to India where my grandparents live and like being questioned by the border force still. I've had to stop tweeting about it. I was writing a lot about Kashmir in 2019 and I have had to stop just because I've had to be quite careful with my online presence. But these things are a reality for people. So when it is a global player, which it is, like Apple has just moved its headquarters to its manufacturing department to India. Like there's so much happening within India, and it is going to be one of the biggest global players. So yes, but who is that benefiting, and who is it on the back of? And that's the question I always ask: is it's built on oppression, and that's not okay ultimately.
Would you like to
Completely
answer?
agree. Yeah, I think, what type of renaissance do we want to have? I mean, do we want to have a renaissance that is built on capitalism and oppression of peoples, or do we want something different, And I think until we see abolition of the caste system, I don't think we can really be talking about anything moving forward that isn't what we've already seen. It's just different groups that are being oppressed in different ways. It just moves around, And so for me, personally, I feel like that's a major focal point if we want to move forward, because I think what we're seeing in recent times is a much more galvanized effort to break down the systems essentially, and knowledge share so that we can start to build empathy and create change. And so I'm hopeful, and I think we're at a really powerful time, but I think it's up to us to make it what we want to make it.
Thank you for that, Rita. I'm just going to add something on for anyone who might doubt what happens when you're a journalist and the current powers that be in India are doing what they do. I made a documentary for the World Service recently called Modi's Hip Hop Nation, which wasn't about Narendra Modi. It was actually about how do rappers navigate his power, because rappers love to obviously just pontificate from the heart. And the moment my mum found out about the name of the documentary, she actually burst out crying and just said, am I ever going to be able to go back? And that was a real life situation that I didn't even think about. And even to this day, I can tell it's there in the background, because my mum wants to go back either at the end of this year or the beginning of next year, and she's honestly worried that she's never going to go back to the land of her birth, the land she's been going like every year for the last 30 years. So this shit's real, people.
It's true.
Anyway, Q&As. I'm sure you have lots of questions. As I said to you earlier on, you're at the JLF in the British Library. I'd be shocked if there were no questions. Just put your hands up, please.
Hi, my name's Renu, and Rita and Dhruv, honestly, thank you so much for this, eye-opener for me. My only question to you, Rita, I would say, can I be inclusive in everything? I'm married, I have kids and everything, but listening to it just seems I'm not included in all these kind of situations. And I want to bring up my kids to be inclusive of everything and open, and that's where I feel a little bit sometimes let down.
So what's the question? Is it Raina?
It's Renu.
Renu, what was the
I just don't feel I'm included.
So you want to be...
Yeah, I'm going to frame it, and Renu, you can say, but I think what Renu's saying is this is all amazing. Renu seems to also be saying, I've not really been part of these communities, and now I'm bringing up my kids. I think there's an edge of you feeling like maybe you're being pushed to the background. Is that correct, Renu? Okay. So it's a double-edged question, I think, which is, it's all great, let's move forward. I want to do it for my kids, but I do also feel like I'm not allowed in, I think, is what she's saying. How do we deal with that? I'll leave it to you to answer.
I think that, I don't know how you identify or like what your, identities are, etc. But I do think that at the moment, we live in an amazing time when there is space for everybody. And I think that if there isn't, then you can create it, which is what I did, which is what you did, which is what you did. That's what we're talking about. It's, to me anyway, is how do we create the spaces that we want to have represent us. So I think first it's like, do those spaces already exist? And if not, how do I connect with other people that I do feel that connection with, if that's not found in other places? I don't know if that's answering the question.
Renu, is it fair to say that you actually feel you're not allowed in? Oh, wow, okay.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're totally allowed into any space. I think. Yeah? That's fine. Okay, so the festival I throw, it's called Dialed In. The whole point of it is that anybody can come, right? We've made our tickets for this year's festival £10. Hopefully everybody can afford £10. You can come, your kids can come, anybody can come, no matter your identity, no matter your caste, your class, your creed, anybody can come to these spaces. It's about actually allowing yourself to be vulnerable enough to enter some spaces. And it's, not you, I'm just saying it's about people just getting to enter these spaces. You don't necessarily have to feel excluded because there are so many spaces if you're South Asian and want to enter South Asian spaces. That's it. Like, there are so many places out there that you can go to, and it happens all the time. There's a lot on.
Can I also say something? I think, Renu, when Dhruva is saying you have to be vulnerable, and you responded, why do I have to be vulnerable? I think it's incumbent on people to be vulnerable, which doesn't mean being scared, just being really open and,
Correct.
Maybe emotionally moved and taken in directions they might not like, first of all. It's incumbent on people to do that throughout their life in most new spaces. That's what you meant, right?
100%, yeah. Vulnerability in terms of openness, not scared.
Is there anything else you want to say, Renu?
No, I mean, I'd agree with that. I think it is about being open. I mean, if you want to learn about, Gaysians. Yeah, I mean, so if you go to Gaysians.org, there are a lot of organisations on there, and there are increasingly parent groups as well that are in contact with each other, and there's a lot of community building around that. There's an organisation called Naz and Matt Foundation that do a lot of work for parents of LGBTQ plus kids. So if you wanted to be able to have those sorts of conversations with your own kids and be open and understand this space, which is an amazing thing to do, I think, as a parent, then I'd really recommend Naz and Matt Foundation as a resource to check out.
More questions? There's two at the back and one over here as well. And so I'll let you decide.
Okay, thank you so much. I've enjoyed the conversation. And just to lead on, I think the main frustration, if that's the right word, is that as far as the South Asian Renaissance or creative sector is concerned, is that we don't really have a intergenerational cultural conversation in any way. And your generation, if I can be general, you're very much more connected on social media and you can communicate in a much more effective manner, whereas I wouldn't say that I am able to do that. I'm much more able if I met you in person. And forget about me, this morning I went to a talk. This woman, I read this book when I was a teenager. It's called The No Way Man by a writer who lived in the UK in the 50s, and her daughter is trying to release her books, These books are, so every sort of generation feels a bit of a cultural neglect, and like that lady is saying, I kind of understand what she's saying, and we're not trying to complain or we don't want to be in your club if you don't want us, but we want you to understand the depth and the breadth of the South Asian Renaissance that has kind of evolved in the UK. So maybe it's just a comment rather than a question, but I think my question would be is like, how can we have intergenerational conversations with each other without feeling that one generation has been cut off and the next generation is like suddenly, wow, it's the South Asian Renaissance 2.3 or whatever it is, Thank you.
Dhruva, yes, and I just quickly want to add, as someone who I know is part of your generation, and the only reason I'm sat up here is because I'm still working at the moment. I just want to say, I get what you're saying. I meet many people your age. Let's start the generation wars now. And I have this situation where they'll come to me and go, oh my God, you guys were icons and you guys did this. And because we were the first people to get out there on YouTube, or some of our archives, just a tiny bit of our archives that are on YouTube, I get the feeling that people under 30, even though they know South Asians have been around, have no idea what someone who's in their 60s or 70s right now went through. And a lot of that is actually about digital literacy as well, because guess what? YouTube is almost like a library for some people. Anyway, I just wanted to add that. Sorry, Dhruva, I know you wanted to answer that.
Bobby, before you do, so when somebody says to you, I feel that's the kind of kiss of death. You know, it's a backhanded compliment. You were great then, but please go and sit on the shelf now. But I was really sad to hear what Dhruva was talking about, pitching stories, when he said that the response was, oh, we can't have two stories on two South Asians. That depresses me, because that does make me think, how much has it moved in certain other spheres? Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
I was just going to quickly say that, yeah, again, the festival I throw, intergenerational, we constantly put on events that are for different generations. We go out and flyer things, like physically put posters everywhere. We constantly put things in venues, in libraries, in community centers, everywhere we can, because we realize this. It's not something we're taking for granted. These are conversations I've had with you, the conversations I had with Ritu so many times. Like, we don't want to make it a legends slot dialed in. We actually just want to incorporate people, and that way, like, people of all generations can come to these events.
How's that for the kiss of death? A legend slot.
No, I said we don't want to make it a legend.
I know. I was
but this is specifically it. We are trying our best to do it.
Oh, we can. Excellent. Okay.
Oh yeah, I was just saying, like, we are literally trying our best to do this. We're trying different media forms. Like, we don't have all the answers, but we're quite, yeah. There we go. The V&A late.
We've got time for one more question. I'm not entirely sure, so I'm going to let this lovely lady, I think it's Bordova, I'll let her decide. Oh, there you go.
Hi there, my name is Darren. I'm 15 years old and I'm in the last year of my secondary education. I'm in year 11. And I recently moved to a predominantly white area. I've been there for 2 years now. And I must say it has been the hardest 2 years of my, like, young life, because it's so hard to fit into these groups of white male boys. Obviously we're all teenagers, obviously we're all, hormonal and, testosterone, but it's been so difficult because everyone was in their cliquey groups, and I joined in year 9, so that was quite a tough year to join because everyone was in their groups and everyone was there on their own. So, no, not on their own, sorry, they were all in their groups and they were all together, like a team. And for this Indian guy who's just joined the school, I feel like it seemed like a threat to them, and I was quite worried about that. So my question to you all is, what do you recommend for me? What are your recommendations for me as a young 15-year-old boy growing up in 2023 when there's still, I wouldn't say racism, but there's just these dodgy comments being made, but it's I don't know how to explain it. It's like this subtle racism. Nothing specific has been said to me that's racist, but I feel like the way I'm being treated and the way people, treat me and the way they look at me, it's different, and I feel really trapped. So I was going to ask you all, what would you recommend for me as a teenager? Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that really personal experience and for asking the question. I also grew up with a lot of, in a very white middle class environment and felt very othered. And what I wanted to say earlier was actually, they just mentioned that exact type of racism that you're talking about. It is racism, by the way. Don't be shy about calling it what it is. It is racism. It's very much alive in the UK now, probably more than it has been for a long time. So what you're experiencing that I relate to is essentially sort of microaggressions and a very particular type of racism, which isn't actually calling you a name necessarily, but it still impacts you and you know that you're feeling it. So I'd say firstly, just allow yourself to, trust yourself with how you're feeling. I think that's really important because I certainly spent a lot of my life not trusting how I was feeling and listening to other people and second guessing myself. And one of the greatest gifts of being the age that I'm at now is that I've learned how to do that a lot better, and it's still a work in progress. But that's one thing that I would say to you is like trust how you're feeling. I actually recommend writing and journaling as a way to really express yourself and get stuff out onto the page. It's been one of the most powerful ways that I've found to connect with myself. A lot of the events that I put on and attend and perform at are spoken word type of events, and it's really great to go to those types of spaces, which you might not have around you right now. But if you're able to access those either online and content that allows you to feel less alone, or to even share some of what you're experiencing, like you have today, it can really help you. And I'm saying this as a storyteller that went through the same experience, starting to find the confidence to share my story and finding a connection in other people who've experienced the same thing. And it's also very healing an experience to do that. And if you can talk to people around you or the friends that you have that you feel safe to talk to, then I really recommend that as well. Because you only need one good friend that you can talk to about how you're feeling to feel so much better, you know?
Can I just quickly add, I don't know if this is an answer at all, but I just want to say it anyway. Year 7, around about the age of 13, I left a very multicultural school and ended up in an all-white school and received racism from the day I got there, not just from the bullies, not just getting slapped and kicked, but from even all the kind of nice guys, because the bullies ran the school. And all I'm going to say to you is, it was the worst time of my life. I hated my life at that point. And then when I went through it, it went off towards GCSE time, then I ended up in college and it stopped. And the reason it stopped is because A, I had other South Asians there, but more importantly, B, it's not school anymore. You've got people all there just studying for their A-levels. And what happened was, without even knowing, my heart burst open and I fell in love with the British Asian community, as we called it back then. And I remember meeting an artist, and this artist said, every artist has got a muse. And I thought I was an artist. And I went, oh my God, my muse is the British Asian community, because I fell so deeply in love with it. And it was all a reaction against that year of being ostracized, being slapped, getting microaggressions. So I haven't got an answer for you now, but everything I've built in my life, everything, up until today, tonight, here, sitting on this stage, it's because of that year I went through in year 7, going through what you went through. So that's all I can say.
I also similarly went through something. I moved to Canada when I was 12 from India. Kind of a shock, it's cold, a lot more white people. But you should join Arts Emergency. If you are a creative, or if you even like drawing, as simple as that. I mentor through that organization. I have been mentoring for a few years. There's a few organizations out there where they pair working class and young kids of color with mentors. And every single young person at the age of 18 I've mentored has actually said the same thing. So and they all get to meet, I think, once every 4 months. So it kind of creates like a little community, and you get to meet other kids your age who are going through similar problems all across the UK. I don't know where you're based, but the organization exists all across the UK. It's called Arts Emergency. It's incredible, highly recommend it, and it's a really good way for you to understand that you're not alone in this, and that it's a lot of people who are going through the same stuff as you. And it's always good to have a mentor who can talk to you about the fact that they've also been through it too and how to navigate that. We meet once a month, and I know my mentees really have enjoyed it. I hope they have, at least.
That's it for today. Thank you so much for taking time out. Thank you for sitting and listening. I want to thank JLF Thank you very much indeed, guys, for starting an amazing festival, bringing it over back here to the UK. Also, Nutkhut as well for curating all of this. We really appreciate it. And last but not least, the British Library. Thank you.